Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Mantel, the topic leader for freelancing at AHCJ. This webcast is one in a series of topic-specific training opportunities for health journalists from AHCJ. I focus on freelancing, so past webinars that I've done have been about navigating freelance contracts, solutions journalism, pitching niche publications. Today's topic is one that many freelancers have asked me for. It's about breaking into narrative journalism. These kinds of stories are very powerful ways of reaching your audience by focusing on character and story arc while explaining or analyzing a complex health issue. They're very rewarding to do, but I can speak from personal experience that they can be extraordinarily time-consuming and require big intellectual and emotional commitment. There are a lot of questions about how to do this kind of journalism in today's marketplace, where outlets are come and go and budgets and editors change frequently, and where freelance fees have not kept up with inflation, to say the least. So in today's webinar, we'll get valuable tips for freelance writers who would like to break into narrative journalism, particularly longer pieces. Maybe you're a journalist who's always had an idea for such a project, but don't know how to go about it. Or you're a journalist who focuses on features and news, and you're just curious about what it takes to do this kind of journalism. So joining us as panelists today in alphabetical order are Jane C. Hugh. Jane is a freelance journalist based in Seattle and a contributing editor of High Country News. Her work has appeared in publications like Slate, High Country News, Wired, National Geographic, Smithsonian, Scientific American, and The Atlantic. She sits on the boards of the National Association of Science Writers and the Open Notebook. Brady Huggett is the enterprise editor at Spectrum, the leading source of news and analysis and expert opinion about autism research. And he edits features and long-form projects there. Before joining Spectrum, Brady served as business editor at Nature Biotechnology and managing editor of the biotech daily news service BioWorld. He has a master's degree in journalism, and I find this very interesting, also in creative writing, and he's won prizes for fiction and nonfiction writing. And Pamela Weintraub joins us. Pam is the senior editor for science and psychology at Aeon, or Aeon, a digital magazine of ideas, philosophy, and culture. She is the co-editor-in-chief at OpenMind magazine. And previously, Pam was senior editor, features editor, and executive editor at Discover magazine, where she assigned and edited long-form journalistic narratives and investigations that won top journalism awards. I'm going to start off by asking the panelists a few questions of my own. They'll also answer your questions. So you can type your questions into the Q&A space. Use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Don't use the chat, please. Use the Q&A function. And the first thing I'd like to do is just to define what we're talking about today. Briefly, what is narrative journalism, particularly long-form narrative journalism? Jane, do you want to start with that, please?
Sure. I think of narrative journalism, the heart of it is storytelling. You mentioned long form. I think a lot of people associate narrative journalism with long form specifically. And I do think, of course, long form is a good format for that because you really can get into this world building, story building in order to help you dive in really deep into this topic. But I think you can use elements of narrative storytelling in any length of piece. I think a lot of magazine journalism in particular kind of focuses on that storytelling. I think for me, what defines it is following a particular person, place, having a main character of sorts or several characters in your piece to help you kind of delve into whatever topic it is. And I'm sure we'll get into more examples of that as we continue chatting about it.
Brady, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I was nodding my head along as Jane was speaking. I think for me, it's like you're going to have the space to talk about people, and that might be the main protagonist of the article. It might be the leading researcher. It might be a family, but you're going to go on long enough so that the reader becomes invested in those people, and that's what gives it kind of a narrative arc. Sometimes that main character that Jane mentioned shows up 2, 3, 4 times in the article to help kind of buoy it over the long distance. But yeah, I think the main thing is, these pieces have people in them. They're almost a driving point of the article is you're going to be with these people for a while, so let's settle in.
Pam?
Well, a piece of narrative journalism has a dramatic arc, just like a piece of fiction has a dramatic arc. And yeah, there are people in it. The people they speak, they have dialogue, there's tension, there's an arc where you have, like you have a height to the story, you have a denouement of the story. That is a very classic form of narrative journalism. And basically, sometimes I think that an idea can be a protagonist and be done narratively and artistically. So
Or a place, perhaps, even a place, especially if it's maybe an environmental story.
yeah.
Someone I know who does this mentioned to me, it's not just people, Barb, it can be a place. Someone asked me earlier before the webinar began, is there a minimum length in which you can tell a good narrative story? Great.
I'll take that. This is sort of the same question as someone will say, how long are your features? How long is it's like, well, you don't know. It's however long that's required to tell this particular story, right? Whatever the reporting takes you. So I don't know if there's what is the shortest length that a piece could be? If you are talking about something like fiction, Pam, you can read great fiction in 300 words, right? So I don't know. I don't know. I suppose you could do it in 1,000 words, but I've certainly never written one like that myself.
Okay.
Can I just say at
Sure.
Aeon? Yeah, I just wanted to add, at Aeon, we actually have a length for this. So we basically do not go below 2,500 or 2,800 words. Anything below that for us is considered short form. And really consistently, these stories that go below that are thin for Aeon, even though I agree a person can do it in 1,000 words.
Okay. Jane, I want to talk about a particular article that you wrote. You wrote an article for Wired several years ago about an all-female team that went to the North Pole. And it looked like you were with them, like you embedded a bit. And it seemed to me a great example of narrative journalism. What I want to know, and I think our listeners are interested in, is we're not going to talk so much about how to write this kind of story, but sort of what does it take? How much time and effort, and what does it pay? That kind of thing. So that's what I want to ask you. That story that you wrote about the all-female team to the North Pole, how long did it take you to do the original research and reporting, and then to actually, the preliminary reporting, and then to do the interviews? And are we talking about, months, a year, weeks? What was involved?
I think by the time the piece came out, it had been over a year. And I'll say that in terms of putting together a narrative piece, for me, that was kind of on the fast end. So this came from experiment.com, interestingly, a site where scientists often crowdfund to try and support their projects. I had just gotten a digest email from them and saw this interesting project from this researcher who wanted to take physiological readings from women who were skiing to the North Pole, because a lot of this physiological data that we have is mostly about men in extreme environments. And that has big implications for, other extreme environments like space, for instance. So I saw this, reached out to the scientist, started chatting with her, started chatting with people on the team, and quickly realized that this was going to be kind of a big undertaking in terms of trying to get funding for something like that. So this team before skiing to the North Pole, a lot of the teams that do that use Svalbard, so Longyearbyen. It's an archipelago in Norway, just north of the Norwegian mainland. And it's pretty tough to get to. Like 2,000 people live there. It's a pretty small place. There's like a few flights from Oslo in March, which is kind of the high season for North Pole attempts. So I sought out funding to get money for that travel. I applied for a grant from the IWMF, International Women's Media Fund. Was very lucky and grateful to get that funding. And that is kind of what made this whole piece possible. So I think that the lesson there for folks, definitely look into what your funding options are. If you have a great relationship with an editor at a publication that has a travel budget, fantastic. I will say that a lot of the magazines that I have worked with, I don't know that they would have that amount of funding for travel. I know a lot of great magazines do have some travel budget, but often, in the neighborhood of a few $1,000s rather than, I think my grant from IWMF was for $10,000, and I did end up using all of it.
I'm going to get into more questions about money, which is a really important question, in a little bit as well. So I want to come back to that. So your pitch was, so your story was something that you pitched to Wired. It wasn't assigned to you.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
I actually had shopped it around several other places, and I mean, it had even actually fallen through at one other place for just internal logistical reasons. As you mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, things are always changing at magazines, and often pieces can get killed for reasons completely unrelated to the story. And that is what happened in this case. So yeah, I mean, it was a real roller coaster, I'll be honest, but in the end, I was really proud of the work I was able to do and was really glad that I was able to actually follow through on that piece. But I think for listeners who are interested in doing something similar, just know that it's not always smooth sailing. Often you will meet these challenges, and that is unfortunately fairly normal, I think. So going into a project like that, if you really believe in it, just being prepared to kind of roll with the punches a little bit.
Okay. As I said, we're going to talk a little bit more, and we have some questions coming in about grants and stuff a little further down. But I wanted to first talk about, you said you pitched it, you said you marketed it around. I want to ask all three of you to weigh in on what you think the market is these days for this kind of high commitment, intimate journalism. Brady, do you want to take that one first?
When you say, what the market is, meaning what I think, like how many we would take a year, what we pay for them, or just
yeah. Specific to you, and if you have any
broad
other
thoughts
from talking with other editors and other publications, is there much of a market for this kind of journalism?
Yeah, so I think the answer is yes, there is, but because they're so time intensive and because they're costly, like, we will pay travel for reporters to go do things. If there's a conference, if there's something that we know is important to the story, we will send them to do that. But that means you can't do them all the time. And then, from an editor's point of view, they're very difficult to get into place. Sometimes the writers are struggling to handle something of that length, but also just to get it in our style. What we need for our specific readers might be a little bit different from what a freelancer thinks, and you have to have some back and forth. When they're done, we love them, we promote them, we get the best art that we can. We're very proud of them, we put them up for awards, but we can't do more than a few of those a year. So I think that's probably true. I can see Pam nodding her head. I think that's probably true at most places. They want them. We know readers like them, but they're really difficult to do. They can be expensive. So we don't do all that many. Do
you pay like just your typical freelance rate for a story like that? I know you say you cover some travel.
Yeah, right. So if we have freelancers, or we do have freelancers, and they generally have a set rate for whatever they do. It's a word rate. We're not cheap. We start at $1 and go up. We have a decent budget for freelancers. We don't, I don't think we generally pay like, hey, we know this is a harder story to do, so we'll pay you a little bit more. But we do say, hey, yeah, if you want to go there, in fact, we want you to go here, we will pay for your flight, your hotel, et cetera, a certain amount to eat. But I don't think we pay anything extra just because it's a longer story.
Pam?
Well, these stories, I think you've said very well. These stories are difficult to get into play. And the thing is that we at Aeon, we don't even have a limit. We would always be open to them if they are within the scope of what we cover, and if the pitch is great. It's hard for somebody to really land that with us, though. And even if it passes with me, then I take it on to the pitch meeting, and then it can still get shot down. But the way and these stories are they're difficult to execute, and they're a lot of work to write. There are a lot of drafts. It's a lot of work for the writer, and there has to be, from my perspective, I think there needs to be a motivation beyond the money. I mean, Aeon doesn't pay as well as Spectrum. We pay $1,800 for a feature story. It can be 2,500 words. It can be, it doesn't, we'll pay more if it goes over 6,000 words and we assign it at that very long form, then we'll pay more. But basically, there needs to be, I think, on the part of the writer, a motivation beyond just doing it to pay the rent or pay the bills. It's got to be a work of passion in a certain way.
And Brady and Pam, how long do these projects typically take from the assignment being okayed to wrapping up the final draft for something this intensive?
Pam, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, okay. Well, it could take, every once in a while somebody nails it. I just had an experience with a writer who pitched one of these stories to me, and in 2 or 3 drafts he nailed it, and it took him just a few months, and that's great. It's great for him because he didn't, but it can take a year sometimes with all of the back and forths and trying to get it just right.
Brady?
Yeah. I think if I were to say, if it was going well, from initial pitch or initially signing up a freelancer for a piece and the drafts to publication, it's probably about 6 months, I would think. But when I've written them, and usually so I'm not a freelancer, and I'm actually really interested to hear more about what Jane has to say about this. But I tend to do these on the side of all my editing, which means it takes longer. I've had pieces that took 2 years to finish because there was travel involved, whatever. But I don't think freelancers can do that. I think freelancers have to, they are a little more cognizant that this money has to come in one way or another. I've been working this for 6-8 months. What do you think, Jane?
I structure a lot of my work life around these big projects of mine. I go into it with the mindset knowing that it's not going to be quick and that it's not going to be my main source of money for quite a while. There are a few magical publications out there that offer people an advance on their piece. So, upon assignment, some amount of money, which is very helpful for freelancers especially. But for the most part, you're not expecting to get paid until afterwards. So a lot of my work life is kind of structured around having regular gigs, taking on shorter pieces, and having these regular clients that I work with. And then kind of pitching these big swing narrative stories or investigations that I know are going to take at least a year, maybe several years.
Can you work on the other stuff, the stuff that brings in the paycheck while you're working on a big story? Like, were you able to work on other stories when you did the North Pole story?
Yes. And it's not always easy because sometimes you really want your head to be just in that space. Especially now, like I'm working on an investigation alongside several regular gigs, and I basically try and structure my week so that everything gets at least a day, or at least I break up my day into, in the morning, I'm going to work on this, and in the afternoon, I'm going to work on this, just to carve out specific time for each project. But I think one of the $1 million questions for freelancers is always, how do you manage your time? And I think in the case of trying to work on these long form investigations, most of our narratives, most of us probably cannot afford to be only working on that thing at that time. So I think kind of juggling and figuring out how to make that juggling work for you is going to be an important part of getting into narrative journalism if that's not already a part of your work life.
Let's talk about the pitch. Pam, you had said, the pitch has to be just right. How does a pitch for a feature that may involve a piece of journalism that may involve travel and embedding yourself with someone, making a big commitment of time, how does that pitch differ from a pitch for a straight up feature?
So what I encourage people to do is write a pitch for the pitch, because these pitches are a lot of work. And I don't want to encourage anyone to work on this kind of pitch unless there's a good shot, not a guarantee, but at least a shot that this is going to be taken.
So a pre-pitch.
So I ask people to send me a paragraph or two, like just write a pitch for the pitch. It's not a pitch I'm going to take to the pitch meeting. It's just a pitch I can know to say, yeah, go for it. And often I will actually take these pitches and the pitch for the pitch and run it by the EIC, say, so-and-so wants to write a pitch for this. Are we open to it? So I clear the way for people to not completely waste their time.
Brady,
And,
do you accept
yeah,
pre-pitches?
Can I
Pre-pitches.
ask Pam a question about that?
Yeah.
So what does that look like, Pam? What does a pitch for a pitch look like? Is that like 2 sentences?
No, it could be a paragraph or two. It's for one of these big articles, though. It could be a paragraph or two, not a sentence, but a paragraph or two. And it needs to include, also what the writer's past experiences.
Yeah.
If somebody is a very highly qualified features writer, they may need to do less than if somebody has never done this before, then their pitch has to really show within the pitch. It's not within the pitch for the pitch itself. It needs to show they really have the chops to do this, because it's not just a lot of work for the person. It's a lot of work for us. It's a lot of work for me to take this on and take somebody through this. So the pitch for the pitch is a paragraph is good.
Yeah.
Brady, do you take pre-pitches?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I don't think that I have some sort of like, hey, it has to look exactly like this, and maybe I should, but someone will say, hey, I've got an idea, and I will say, okay, well, what is it? And it's a lot like Pam. It's sort of like you need to show me that, number one, the idea is right for us, okay, and that who we are. Obviously, we're going to be focused on this, and okay, here's the pitch that focuses on that. But 2 is that you understand the area around it, and that you can do it, and that could be clips. But if someone doesn't have any clips, they don't have, they haven't won this award, that doesn't really, I'm almost always willing to gamble on that person. If they understand, this is what, if the pitch is good, if they have something that I can't see anyplace else, I haven't read anyplace else, they've got a data set that no one else has access to, they have talked to these people that no one else is talking to, and I'll perk right up. And then I'll be like, okay, I need to work with this person on how we can get this article in. Yeah, but again, like, those are a lot of hurdles to clear, because there's nothing worse than working 3 months and getting your first draft and you go, oh no, this is never going to happen. It's dismaying for everybody, right? And that's what we want to avoid.
Can you both be more specific about what you want to see in a pitch for a story that's this involved? Particularly, we have some early career journalists on board here who are asking, maybe I haven't won that award, or I don't have a deep bed of clips. What do they have to show you in a pitch for this kind of story?
So, this story that I mentioned, that this writer succeeded in doing in about 3 drafts, was pitched. This person was an early career journalist, and this person had written a pitch that was just very, it had the vibe of Aeon, right? It had the vibe, it had the writing in it. So this person within the body of the pitch spent 2 or 3 pages writing, really showing the skill to write this story. And the person had also done interviews. The person had interviewed top people just for the pitch. And the person was profiling some people as well who were, so this was a medical story, psychology story. So some were experts and some were people. Well, this writer's mother who had died was one of the people that he was profiling. So he had a very deep connection to this topic. So he passed all those hurdles, and he demonstrated that he had the chops to do it by writing a pitch that was fabulous.
That brings me to my next question, which is related, and that is, I'm going to ask Jane this: how much reporting and researching and interviewing do you do for a story like this, even just for the pitch? Freelancers, they're not getting paid at that point. They don't know if they're going to get the assignment, but maybe that's what it takes to get the assignment. So what's your advice?
I think it really depends on the story and your relationship to the editor that you are pitching. So Pam, I love it when I have a relationship with an editor, or it sounds like you do this with everyone, which is wonderful, to ask people to send this pre-pitch so that, no one is wasting their time in that situation. I feel like that is fairly rare, unfortunately, although a practice that I really like. But I think if, you don't know the editor and your early career, or maybe just haven't done this type of writing, often I think you are going to have to invest quite a bit more time in researching the story and making your case in that pitch, since you can't really rely on previous clips or on the previous relationship you have with an editor. For me, if I am looking to basically cold pitch an editor that I have not worked with yet, I want to do as much research as I feel like I need to do to feel like I know I definitely have the story. So if there are going to be main characters, I want to talk to them first. They need to be on board, because otherwise it is a huge nightmare to try and reverse engineer that or change who the main characters are going to be. Depending on the story, it might be easier or harder to do that. But essentially, I try and interview at least a couple people to make sure that the story has legs, that they're willing to participate. And I, just for myself, like to plot out what I think the main idea is. And of course, in conversations with that editor, sometimes that main focus might change a little bit, but I think you going in with a really clear idea of where that narrative arc is going to go and what you want the reader to get out of it really helps you also make that case in a pitch much more clearly. And I'm sure editors get a lot of emails that are kind of like, I would like to write about this topic broadly, which, sometimes depending on, like Brady said, if this person has specific access to people, it's an idea that hasn't been explored before, they have some data that hasn't been looked at, that might work for you. But in most cases, editors are going to want to see a story, especially for a narrative piece. So I think doing those interviews right up front and just being really clear on what your pitch is, what the story is before you even pitch it, is unfortunately time consuming, but is going to pay off in the long run and not result in this runaround where you're months into this project and it kind of falls apart.
I'm sorry, Brady. One person just wrote in and said they wanted to know, Jane, how much of that kind of legwork do you do? Just forget about pitching, just to determine it's a good story and that it's going to be worth your time.
I'm in the middle of that right now, actually. I'm looking into a story. I've emailed with like 3 different people about it, and I'm finally getting them on the phone. And I've been thinking about it since March. And that, that's alongside a bunch of other stuff I have going on, but I'm letting the idea percolate a little bit, taking some time to explore and trying to make sure that it's really there. And I'm still not completely sure it's really there. So it can take a bit.
The key takeaway I hear is you got to have a lot of good paying gigs while you explore this longer form
It definitely helps. I will say that when I was earlier career and I did not have any regular gigs, I did take on actually quite a bit of fact checking to supplement, which was a somewhat regular gig, but it can be done. It is a little bit more precarious if you don't know your cash flow situation in the meantime while you're exploring new ideas. But I think some of that can also be filled by just quicker turnaround pieces like news stories.
Brady, you were going to say
Oh,
something?
I mean, I was just going to say, Jane, you can pitch us any time you want. If that's the background, like I wish I was getting those kinds of pitches, that kind of thoughtfulness and the work that's going in beforehand. Oh, it's like a dream.
Okay. So one other, we were having a couple of questions come in. I just want to make sure I'm looking at my pitches about, let's talk about, okay. First of all, Jane, I think you had mentioned some publications pay in advance. Of course, someone wants to know what they are. If you want to answer that question.
The one that comes to mind immediately that I know is still around and is still doing it is Biographic. I believe they pay, I think for a piece that I did for them in 2021, I got a $500 advance and then the rest upon completion of the piece. They're wonderful to work with. I'm sure they would not mind me saying that. They are more kind of focused on life sciences, but if you have anything at the intersection of health and life sciences, or if health journalism isn't your full-time thing, definitely look into pitching them, and they pay well as well, and have beautiful visuals to go with pieces.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the editing process. We have a question for Brady and Pam. How much work do they do once they have a manuscript in hand? So I imagine it all depends on the shape it comes in.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. But I would just say a lot, right? I mean, especially something narrative. I mean, if you have a good editor, they will have thoughts. And that's a great thing. You want to do this collaboratively, the two of you. The reporter has done all this work. They brought in all this information. They put it into shape. It's probably not exactly the shape that you thought it would be in. And together, the two of you should kind of figure it out. So I mean, I edit a lot, but it's always collaboratively. I don't just mash up a piece and send it back and be like, take that. It's a conversation about what's on the page and what might be on the page and what else could be on the page. Yes. So a lot of editing.
Pam?
So my edits of these pieces are always collaborative, always, because what I do is send it back to the writer with notes, and I try to make my comments iterative so that I'm not saying do this and then the next second I'm saying no, do that instead. It's always stepwise. So first I will send notes just on the organization, just switch it around this way. And what I want is to not tread on these stories with hobnailed boots. What I want is to preserve the writer's voice. And when you just go mash up, if you went through, you as an editor could go through and edit their story and make it in the style of your publication, but it would have a flatness to it because you weren't there. You didn't go to the places. You didn't interview the people. So the best stories are always done in this collaborative method where you get back to the writer, you ask them to fix their story, they get it back to you, you send it back to them, and you just keep going back and forth until you get to a point where you can actually do a line edit. Then I do a line edit. But I really feel that rewriting these pieces ruins them. So but that's a lot of work for the writer. So I can send it back a lot of times,
Right. Jane, we have a question. When you're approaching interviews, possible sources for interviewing, and you don't know yet where the story is going to be published, how do you talk to those sources? What do you explain to them?
I am very upfront about that because I don't want any misunderstanding. And I do think that sometimes, especially higher profile scientists who maybe get a million media requests, maybe don't want to spend their time on that. But I usually say something along the lines of, hello, I'm looking into a piece about this. And then I tell them a little bit about why I want to talk to them and really make the case for it. And that's another way that I feel like it's really important to have done your homework, to find the right people. And ideally, people who maybe have not had their story told. So, in a particular field, if you're looking into a story, there might be multiple people you can talk to, some of whom, have already been interviewed a million times. And then maybe there are more junior scientists, for instance, who are closer to the research, have recently published a paper about it and are excited to talk about that. And that is usually who I try and approach, especially if I am looking for if I'm looking into a story to see if it has legs. That often those folks closer to the research sometimes have more knowledge anyway. So getting their perspective and being really clear about the fact that I don't yet have an assignment, but here is the type of place that I would be interested in pitching it. And also if you have clips already saying, my work has been published in these places, just to show that you're not coming out of nowhere and that you actually plan to do something with this in the long run.
We have a question from a new career journalist who says, in that situation, I don't have a publisher yet. I'm trying to get these sources to talk to me and I may not have a lot of clips. That's a tough situation to be in when you're just starting out like that, to convince people to talk to you.
It is. I do think that you can make a case for why that person would be good to talk to. And I am consistently surprised by the number of people who are willing to share their expertise with no promise of, being featured in a piece. A lot of the time, people are just excited to talk about their life work. So I think if you show that you care and that you're paying attention to what they're doing and make a case for why they would be the right person to talk to, sometimes that will be enough.
Brady and Pam, we have a question about deadlines. You have a complicated piece like this, it maybe isn't always clear how long it's going to take. How do you set deadlines?
Well, I'll start. I mean, if this is it's like a long form piece, a narrative piece, a long feature, it's not necessarily pegged to some news event that we have to get it out there immediately or we're going to get scooped. It's not that. So I'm always flexible with the deadlines and I will always push the deadline off if there's a way to improve the story. If that means that I have read it and I think, okay, this reporter needs to go back to this person. They need to get a little bit more here. Could they please set the scene better? Or we both have an idea that might bring a better ending. I'm always searching for better endings when I edit these pieces. I'll push it because we want the best story. Both of us, either the writer and then the editors want the best story out there. So we set gentle deadlines. Can you turn this around in a month? I'll check in. How's it going? How did that reporting bit go? But the hard deadline, we're going to publish it when it's ready, when we all agree it's ready.
Pam?
Well, that's true. But I will say this, that when people ask me, they'll say, well, I want to do this story, but can you give me an 8-month deadline? Like, I never get the story. So it's for that reason, with these stories that have a long tail and are not pegged to an event, that I try to set at least a 3-month deadline. Because if I'm writing the contract, like even just working with them on the pitch and taking their pitch to the pitch meeting and being their advocate in the pitch meeting, right? That's, work for me. I don't want to just keep assigning these things and then never having them come in. So I ask for a first draft, let's say 3 months, 2 months, 3 months. I think that's reasonable. And I think it's reasonable for writers because things on publications do change so much.
Yeah.
That if you wait too long, you've missed the boat anyway. Your editor's not there anymore. So.
Yeah. Like Pam said, if someone said, hey, okay, let me turn a draft in a year, I just, all right, well, then you're not serious. I wouldn't pay any attention to that. Yeah. Pam's right.
Okay. What is the longest deadline that you've gotten, Jane, for a story like this?
Question. I'm actually currently working on an investigation that I started developing in January, and the editor that I've been working with are working deadline is to have it in an October issue. But that also required applying for a grant and several other kind of milestones in this particular investigation along the way. But I would say that that's a pretty long deadline for me, especially, but I think part of it is because I have an existing relationship with this editor already.
Okay.
Generally, I would say, yeah, 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And I will say also that I have found that, well, I have a little bit of a fear of God in terms of deadlines. And I know that if I'm not given a hard, like, deadlines help me. I know that I need to get it in, and that kind of lights a fire under me to get it done. But I know from talking to other friends who have had, life circumstances come up in the middle of it, that often these long form pieces or narrative pieces often do have a little bit more lead time, just because, they're often not specifically timed to anything. And you might
you brought up grants, which is a good segue. I want to bring up money again, which I promised I would. Way back in the 90s, I freelanced for NPR, and I did a bunch of narrative long form projects, like 6-part series, where I embedded, following someone through welfare reform and things like that. NPR applied for the grants. I didn't have to. Brady and Pam, do you guys ever apply for the grants so that the freelancer doesn't have to?
I have not done that, no.
No.
That doesn't mean it doesn't happen here, but I've only been at Spectrum for about a year and plus. It may happen here, but I haven't done it.
Pam?
No.
Okay, that's a firm no.
But,
All right.
but I do have some connections for people with people who give grants, and I would refer my writer on and kind of help them.
Okay, so Jane, when you applied for, let's say, the grant that you got for the women trekking to the North Pole, one of the questions coming in is, did you apply for the funding for that grant once you had the assignment? Because often these applications, they want a letter from an editor and a promise, a tentative promise to publish. Or did you apply for the grant before you had the assignment?
I applied for the grant before I had the assignment. This was actually in my first year of freelancing. I was very early career, and it was a godsend. Like, that is what made that entire piece possible. I think it really depends on the grant. Like you said, some grants require or at least favor people with a letter from an editor with a commitment to publish in that particular publication. But that particular grant from the International Women's Media Fund did not. They did have a more intense process than some other grants. Like, for instance, they did an interview with me where I had to kind of make a case for it. But the nice thing about that was that it did not seem like they required that. So
that I think is unusual. I just want to pause for a second and just let everyone who's listening and attending know that on the AHCJ website, if you go to the Freelance Center, there's a tab called Awards, Grants, and Fellowships. And right now, I have put up, as of today, I have put up 17 grants and fellowships that you can apply for. I'm always looking for more. I don't think I have the one that you mentioned, Jane. And I'm always adding to the list. So you should check that out. It has links to the application process for each one. And a lot of them do seem to require some kind of promise from an editor. I mean, it doesn't have to be a firm promise, but it's we'll seriously think about running this piece kind of promise. And in addition, I wanted to say that we will be having a webinar in the fall about applying for grants and fellowships, specifically that sort of part 2 of this topic. So we're not going to just leave it. We're going to go into more detail, hopefully in October. I wanted to ask Brady and Pam both, if you wanted to call out a particular narrative piece that you edited, that you think it would be helpful for people listening to read and get a sense of, it would be a good example of what you do in your publication in terms of these kinds of stories.
Go ahead, Pam.
Oh, well,
Sorry to
I'm
put you on the
just-
spot.
I just sent a list to Siri Carpenter, who was looking for nominations for the narrative pieces I really liked. I'm just getting it up on my email. The thing about Aeon is that they have a lot of the writers are experts. So here we're talking about journalism, but I would say Julie Burwald did a piece, and this was not really a piece featuring people, but she did a piece on evolution and how it works like a fuzzy network. That was a great story on Aeon. It was called Web of Life. Rebecca Altman wrote American Petrotopia, which featured, her father was a plastics worker, and she's written wonderful stuff on the plastics problem. Lauren Gravitz wrote at Aeon, this is the last one I'll mention because I could go on more, wrote My Spotless Mind at Aeon, about how she blacked out a whole part of a painful memory and what were the repercussions of that. So these were narrative stories that I think were by writers, by journalists, that were really quite well done. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, Brady, I see you put a link in the chat.
I
Tell us
did.
about that story.
I did. So this is called A Cure for Autism at Any Cost. Well, first off, for anybody who doesn't, we basically cover the autism world really, really closely, but we cover neuroscience. So if you're pitching, you should pitch us for both those things. But this was a story about this, this is a long time ago, but there was a movie called Sunrise, where a man and a woman had realized that their child had autism, and they had focused their lives on curing their child of autism, and they did some things that might have helped, and then they sort of formed because they wanted to help other people, they formed a sort of like school, almost a sort of like compound a retreat where people would come and learn about this and cure their kids of autism, and there's no science behind this. And so we sent a writer to go look at this. His name is Brendan Burrell. He's written a lot of good stuff for us. Lauren, by the way, has written some great stuff for us too, Pam.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
And this is a wonderful piece about looking into this. He went and spoke to families, they gave it a narrative arc, but he sort of looked at this thing called Sunrise and this retreat, and whether or not it was actually just pulling in money and playing on the hopes and dreams of parents. So that was a good piece for us, for sure.
Okay, and I see that Pam, you also posted a couple of links in the chat for stories that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah, right. I could post more if you want me to, but
I think that's good.
that's good and that's enough. Yeah.
Okay, now someone is asking about getting contacts for you guys, for Brady and Pam and Jane. If you feel as if you want to put your contacts in the chat, please do so. But I also want to let people know who are listening that if you go to the AHCJ website and you go to the Freelance Center, there are market guides. I think we have over 35 market guides for different publications with editor contact information in there as well. Jane, is there any other advice that you would give people freelance writers who have never, ventured beyond news and features, who are thinking about maybe they're nurturing a project that they've always wanted to do, but they haven't really stepped out and pitched it anywhere?
Let it marinate. I think, like I said, it's going to take a while, most likely. And I think being really clear on what your goals are too is important. So, if it's a passion project and you just want to see it out there, you want to be able to write it in the way that you want to write it, really think about what publications you would want to pitch. And if you are, early career or you haven't done this type of piece before, I think thinking about it kind of in the same way that sometimes people think about college applications, like thinking about publications that you think might be more willing to take it versus your kind of reach or like dream publications. And I would start at the dream, because who knows, right? Like if you want to, write for X big publication, you might as well pitch your best idea to them and not wait until you feel ready to do that. I would say also, depending on how far along you are in the idea, I think I've made this clear already, but I would really encourage you to take your time, especially if this is something that you care deeply about and you want to get right. I think doing as much legwork as possible beforehand is going to make for a better pitch, which is going to make for a better story in the long run as well. And then, as always with freelancing, if you're a freelancer, get your finances straight. We've talked about, it's probably not going to be a huge moneymaker for you necessarily, especially if it's your first one. It's going to take a lot of time. I remember actually during that North Pole piece that I was doing, there was one night that my partner found me at home in the bath crying and had to talk me down from a ledge because something had gone wrong with the piece. I think I had underestimated how much emotional investment I had in that piece and really trying to make it work. I think over time, I've felt a little less attached to some of the longer pieces that I've worked on. But, I think when you spend months to years working on something, you're going to care about it a lot. So just kind of being prepared for the roller coaster of both professionally and personally, if you are really invested in this piece and want to see it out there.
Okay. I'm not sure if the people who are listening can see what's in the chat with the links to the articles that Brady and Pam recommended, but I think that I'll be able to modify the blog post or story post that I wrote promoting this webinar, and maybe I can add that information. I'll find some way to put it on the AHCJ website for those people who are listening.
Can I plug one more thing?
Sure.
What Pam mentioned about sending this list to Siri made me think of this. If folks are not familiar with the Open Notebook, they have a pitch database, which allows you to look at people's previous pitches to whatever magazine that you might be interested in pitching, and often will include a link to the published story. So these are successful pitches if you want to study what people included in them to get them assigned. They also have this great series called Storygrams, which they break down often a narrative long form piece and go through exactly what works about it, why it's good, and usually have a Q&A with the author as well about the making of it. So if this is something that you're interested in getting into and you want to just kind of learn from examples, I think both of those resources could be really helpful, and actually were hugely helpful to me when I was first pitching and trying to get into narrative journalism as well.
Yeah, they're great, actually. Brady and Pam, we're kind of nearing the end, but I was wondering if you might be able to each talk a little bit about the kinds of pitches that you're hoping to get in terms of subject matter, however you want to frame it, actually. Just if anybody listening were interested in pitching you in particular, a long feature or a narrative piece, what would you be telling them you're looking for at this moment in time?
So I won't get specific about I want a story in this part of science, or, you're thinking about Alzheimer's, because we're almost always interested in those things, but and we kind of touched on this a little bit in the beginning. Tell me why this story is important for our readership. And I don't just mean like, hey, I've been thinking about rapamycin a little bit. I mean, concretely why. Your readership needs to know this. It's a brand new thing or whatever. And then once you figured out why, and by the way, you should say whether we've covered it or not. You should look at our archives. It's not paywall protected. You can go through it all. And then tell me why you're the one to write it. You have the access, or you have been talking to these people, or as Jane said, I have already talked to these people and I know. I mean, that would be perfect. And then hopefully show me some sort of clips. And again, you don't have to be like, I've won this award, but I do need to know that you can write, because it's going to be a long process. Like Pam said, make your pitch sing a little bit. right? Put some time in on it. And again, like if any of those things spark my interest, I will probably reply to you and say, okay, tell me more. If none of them do, well, I'll probably just go, this isn't right for us, and not really think much more about it.
Do you want like a possible nut graph, or do you want,
Yes. I should say, yes, I want pitches too. Like the more pitches, the better. I'm always open for new ideas. And if you think you know your way in, tell me. I don't expect you to tell me you know your way out in the whole thing. In fact, the reporting should change. Your story should be different at the end than when you begin, because the reporting is going to inform yourself. Tell me everything you know, angle it toward our publication, make it sharp. Definitely do some things that Jane mentioned, that you've already talked to this person, this is new in the field, the field is changing, we love moments of change. And then tell me a little bit about yourself, so that I think that you can do the work that you've just mentioned.
okay. Pam, are you looking for any particular, within any particular topic or subject areas?
Well, I cover the sciences, health, neuroscience, psychology. So I'm looking for that. But everything that Brady just said is true. So I'm not going to repeat it. But what I'm going to add for Anne is that these pitches need to be bigger than just a good story. They need to be you said this, why you uniquely are the person to write the story, and what special expertise, knowledge, experience do you have, and what are the bigger implications? So for Aeon, they need to be at the crossroads of, these stories always need to be at the crossroads of culture, at the crossroads of society. And so they can't just be, they have to hit that bigger note for us.
Okay. Jane, when you write a pitch like this, do you sell yourself in this way? Do you say, and I am the right person to write this story because?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the piece. Sometimes the reason is because I've done a bunch of research about this and I have the access already. Sometimes it's the fact that I have a psychology PhD, and I think that's actually how I pitched Pam originally on an essay that I wrote years ago. That I had expertise in that particular area, just like content-wise. It really depends, but yes, I think that it is always good to make it clear to that editor why you are the right person, and to just make it really clear in the pitch that you know what's up, that you know where this is going.
Do you write a nut graph for these longer articles that you're pitching? In other words, do you get a sample? Yeah.
Yeah, I usually try and
like a sample opening. Yeah.
I would say if you're writing a pitch for narrative, I would structure it as kind of a mini version of what you see the piece being. Like Pam and Brady have both said, you really want to make your writing sing. You want to make it clear that you know how to write. So opening, actually a lot of the time, whatever lead I have in my pitch ends up being pretty similar to whatever lead I have in the actual story that gets published. And I think the nut graph, like Brady said, sometimes the story will change over the course of reporting. So it might change a little bit, but the nut graph for me is usually, what does this mean? Like, why am I interested in this? And what do I think this means in the long run or the big picture?
Okay. Well, we have come to the end of the hour, and I think it's been great. I want to thank our panelists for giving their time and expertise. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. If you joined us late, you will find the recording of this webcast up on the AHCJ website, I think in just a few hours. And AHCJ will continue to bring you webinars on different topics. And we will be having, I promise, a webinar in the fall about applying for and getting grants and fellowships. So good luck to everybody on their stories, and thank you again, panelists, for participating.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.